It reminded me as I was listening to Sylvia Tamale, one of my favorite authors, thinkers on decolonization. She's Ugandan. And she says decolonizing is a tall order. It requires us to smash the pot and return to the river for fresh clay to mold a new pot. It requires recentering, rehumanizing, reconstructing, and resisting. The goal for African decolonization and the decolonial project is about one thing: the restoration of dignity to the African people. And I think that's something that we have to center and something that the Prof has really brought to the fore. Right, so we're now going to move to discussants and reactions to the paper and contributions from Eunice. I will ask Eunice to come up, and as she comes up, Eunice Ofei is a researcher in public policy whose work focuses on climate finance and development in Africa. She examines how global climate finance flows influence poverty and inequality, and how policy frameworks can be designed to promote fairer and more sustainable outcomes. Her research interests lie at the intersection of climate justice, governance, and economic transformation, with a commitment to exploring approaches that place equity and resilience at the center of development policy. Welcome, Eunice.
Hi, everybody, and good morning to you all. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. So, just a few comments on the black paper that Prof has presented very interestingly from the climate finance perspective. He mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but there's much more information in the paper that will be shared with everyone as has been promised, and then we'll get to read that. So I believe that the paper has made it clear that Africa's fiscal space is already constrained by the debt and also the illicit financial flows, and this affects climate action significantly, and because if a significant portion of our national resources or our national revenue, are directed towards servicing external debt, which is contracted also at very high rates, as Prof mentioned, then little is left for basic needs, education, health, among others, social protection, and again, importantly, climate action. So at this time, the same time, the illicit financial flows are siphoning off billions annually that could otherwise be invested in much needed climate action on the continent. Climate finance does limited absorptive capacity. So I'd like to point out that while I would like to talk about two issues. Structure or architecture is not different from the global financial architecture we've been talking about all through this conference, and how it is designed against Africa, and that is seen also very clearly in the climate finance architecture. So from a public policy perspective, the two issues I want to talk about is the first one is something that has been mentioned here even yesterday a couple of times, that first, the climate finance, most of the climate finance, a significant portion, around 70% of climate finance flowing to Africa is in the form of loans, which is making worse the already existing debt problem that we have in Africa. So rather than easing the debt burdens, it is adding to them. Then the second issue is the fact that because of the dependency, which is also mentioned in the paper, or the dependency on external approval or donor-driven project frameworks, the climate finance tends to be fragmented and misaligned with local priorities. So it tends to come in from designed by external bodies, mostly from the global north, with little regard for domestic policy priorities. And this, rather than helping reduce the problems that the climate crisis has caused, is rather reinforcing these inequalities they are supposedly helping alleviate. So to me, the challenge is twofold. Restructuring the global rules to make climate finance truly reparative, while at the same time strengthening governance here, back at home and at the national levels and on the continent to ensure that finance, once secured, is equitably distributed, or as Prof says, the water gets down, flows downwards and gets to the people on the ground. So without tackling both sides, we risk reinforcing the very resource bleeding that this campaign seeks to stop. So what do we need? We need policy frameworks that are rooted in climate justice and equity. And I want to mention that, so at the global level, first of all, we need climate finance that is genuinely reparative and just. What does that mean? By that I mean that the climate finance is not charity, but it is compensation for the disproportionate burden that Africa carries despite contributing the least to the climate crisis. And so then reparations must become part of the climate finance dialogue. So the way that we frame the reparations is important. If it is seen as charity, it will fail. If it is seen as help, you help someone when you want to or when you have. So I'll give you money when I can. But if it is seen as an obligation, then if it's framed as a legal and moral obligation, then it can shift the discourse and help in enforcing just and reparative climate finance. Then also at the national level, we must build transparent and accountable institutions. Because again, as Prof noted, if the finance is coming into a system where the money leaving the continent is significantly higher than how much we even get by way of climate finance to deal with the projects, then when the money comes in, it will go right out through the leakages that are in the financial system, which I believe is working against each other. That means we are still bleeding, and the bleeding is not being stopped. So at the global level, we want financial systems, the climate finance, to be just and reparative, not charity or even aid. Now, at the national level, again, the challenge is that how do we make sure that these funds are being distributed equitably and transparently? Again, how is the water getting down to those at the bottom? One thing that I would like to highlight is, again, also mentioned in the paper, that gender must be central to these things. Women and girls are disproportionately affected by climate shocks through the loss of lives, food insecurity, or displacement, yet they are often excluded from decision-making on resource allocation. If we want them to benefit, we have to ensure gender-responsive budgeting that supports women-led enterprises in climate adaptation and investing in social infrastructure. Then the funds coming in must be predictable and long-term flows that allow the African governments to not to plan for the finance that are coming in and not just scramble from one project cycle to the next. Again, one suggestion that I would like to make is that if Africa is going to be strong on the global level, we have to be strong internally. We have to strengthen our regional integration and present a strong front on the global stage so that we can better argue or make strong points for why we deserve better, why the systems must change, and why they must work together for Africa. So then, I want to make the point as I close, and then give my time is up, right? Yes. The way forward must be twofold. We must not forget that. While we fight for global reparations and justice, we must also fight domestically for accountability and inclusion, because without tackling both, climate finance risks becoming another channel through which Africa bleeds rather than heals. Thank you very much.